Yeah, well, I maybe I wasn't clear, but that's okay. It's all right. I'll see if I can move it up, and hopefully that works. Hey, there's Scott Sweetman. You're muted there, buddy.
Hi, Al.
Hey, there you are.
How are you,
saw
buddy?
a ghost image go behind you. That was fun. There we go.
Nice, eh?
Okay, perfect. Okay, so this is live. All right, we're live now, Scott.
Nice.
Okay, so Oki, welcome to Hopeifiers, the summer edition for 2021. You look across from me and you say, "Hey, that doesn't look like Daniel Zapula," and it does not. Daniel Zapula, who knew? Daniel Zapula is a golfer. I'm not a golfer. Scott, are you a golfer?
I'm not a golfer either, Alan.
So let Daniel go golf, and Scott and I will talk about interesting stuff. I think that's going to be fun. How about you, Scott?
You bet. I'm excited.
All right.
I can't replace Daniel, but I'll do my best.
Well, you know what? You have some unique world experiences. I mean, your time in running the school in Japan. So it was an international school in Japan, created your own curriculum, kind of made it to align with the home country that child was going to go back to. Very, very progressive practice kind of a thing. So that whole being embedded, imbued in that culture, and then creating that kind of solution for people from all over the world, you learned a lot of things in that process.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So tell us more.
Well, we went to Japan. I think anyone that's listened to us talk probably knows that. We were there for about 14 years. We had our twins there, and it was a fantastic experience. It really became home to us. And I've been fortunate that I haven't really traveled in so much as gone on trips. I've lived in 4, 5 countries, but I've always lived there. It wasn't like 2 weeks. It was 2 years, 4 years, 14 years. So that was a different perspective. And I think when you live in another country, it's a much different experience than visiting there, right? So,
sure, you bet.
And Japanese culture was something that I was always interested in and something that I wanted to do. And when the opportunity came up, it just fit with everything in our lives, and we decided to go. So we did a lot of work with teaching culture and working in the school system there. Both Fleur and I were certified teachers in the Japanese system, so we could actually teach in the high schools rather than ESL or some of those alternatives, which are great. It's just a different experience than we had. And then when we decided to have children of our own, and they were born in Japan, which is a fantastic experience, and having multiples was again added on to that. We were faced with looking at what school options were available to us. And from being a dad yourself, that, here in Canada, it's not something that we often, certainly, out here in Lethbridge or, up where I come from by Bentley, your kids go to the school that's there, right? You don't have to put a whole bunch of thought into, which school and what.
And it's going to be a pretty consistent experience from one to the next. Not could be a whole bunch different, right? Like they're
exactly.
Yeah.
They may have different styles or, slightly different scales of what they offer, but it is a relatively uniform experience, right? But of course, in Nagoya, where we were, 2.5 million people, there was lots of Japanese schools. There were international schools. Most of the international schools were from a particular country, sort of the American International School. There was an international school run by a Christian organization in Nagoya as well. And so when we had our own kids, we started to look at, well, where should they go to school? We had our first school open by then, but not our second school. So we assumed that they would go to our school for their preschool and their primary years, and then later on we wanted them to transition to another school. So we started to look around, and what we found is that there was a really diverse community of expats in Nagoya, as well as a lot of Japanese nationals that were looking for alternative experiences, because the Japanese have a lot of world businesses or international concerns where they ship people, and they're, often there for a long period of time. And recently they've had the option of taking their family with them, which in the past they may not have had. And so those things are up to them. And we ran into a teacher from Finland, and the education system in Finland is very different than it is in Canada. And Fleur, who's a school teacher here, and Kirsi, which is a school teacher in Finland, met each other in the zoo and got talking. And Kirsi said, to Fleur, you should really start your own school. And really, they got talking about that. And, I got involved in the conversation. And for me, I don't always, and this is a good and bad thing, I don't always like taking the status quo option. Like, I always want to look at, what options are available to us and what options can we make available to ourselves. And we found that there were a lot of parents and a lot of children that had very specific needs in education. And unlike here, where needs are often very narrowly defined in terms of special needs or, particular educational needs in terms of behavior or in terms of health. These were people that were looking for, they were, mom or dad were diplomats, or they worked for the UN, or, the next posting, they themselves might be from South Africa and they were in Japan, but their next posting was going to be in France. And then the posting after that might be somewhere else.
Hey, Scott, I'm sorry, I just got to ask you this question. Did you and I have a conversation before about Daryl Davis, the black guy who, with his dad, who toured all over the place in the world? If you don't mind, I'd like to interject this here, because when you're talking about diplomats and, and the expats, I think it might be appropriate. This Daryl Davis, black man, his father, part of the U.S. International type portfolio, if you will, right? And so foreign services, I guess that would be. Anyways, little Daryl travels with his dad all over, and they go to all over in the world, and they meet kids that are like his age. They're different color, different religions, different languages, that kind of thing. And everybody gets along fine. Everything's cool. His dad gets a posting in the U.S., comes back to the U.S., and then in the U.S. he joins the Boy Scouts, right? And so him and his Boy Scout troop are doing a little parade type thing, and Daryl starts getting beamed with rocks and bottles, and it's just like, he's like confused. Why do they hate the Boy Scouts? Like, what's wrong with the Boy Scouts, right? And so this cub leader or the scout leaders, they get in, protect him, and then have to tell him the news. Well, Daryl, it's not the Boy Scouts, it's you, and here's why. It's just because the color of your skin. So he's just can't fathom this. Like, how could somebody hate somebody they haven't met? Like, just how's that possible? So as an adult, he's a big blues man is what he is. As an adult, he goes and he approaches the leaders of Ku Klux Klan groups and basically says, hey, I would like to meet you. And for many of these guys, this imperial wizard, blah, 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 that's spouting racism, like, never, ever met a black person, right? So they meet, have a conversation, and shake hands. And then in the end, a whole bunch of these guys just gave up their robes and their hats, right? Said, yeah, this makes no sense. Geez, this man is just like me, right? So anyways, just I guess the cultural part where you were kind of a melting pot for all these cultures too, right? All the expats and where they came from. So, and part of that, you've kind of gleaned a whole bunch of little nuggets, if you will, of how some cultures view things positively that we might see as negative in North America. Would that be a fair statement?
And that's where I was headed with that, is that when we finally, all the nuts and bolts of it came together, is we all agreed, all the teachers that we involved in the process, that every child benefits from their own curriculum. It's really only that sort of industrial revolution, Ford factory model of education, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but that idea that education should be rather uniform, and that the normal the normal, and I say that in air quotes, being a kid of the 80s, I'm still allowed to use air quotes, is desirable. And when we looked at this very diverse community, the thing that we all agreed on was that all of the kids were unique, all of the families were unique, and it didn't matter what their particular challenges were or what their particular strengths was, is that they would all benefit from having curriculum and content that was really designed for them. And then to take that a step further, a delivery system that was focused uniquely on that child's needs and those things. And in North America, that's sort of an alien idea. Personal education plans are developed, especially in the past, and things are changing, but of course, things never change as quickly as we wanted. That personal education plans were only for children that really, really had special needs in terms of how the information had to be delivered or what needed to be taught. And as you were saying, we were just lucky that in the cultural setting of Japan, where often foreign education doesn't fall into the concerns of the Ministry of Education in Japan, they're very open to us doing whatever we felt we needed for our own children. And so they allowed us to develop curriculums that really met the needs of each child. And with that, there had to be some things overcome, because, and this is where I think where you were heading, is that when somebody would come in and see our classroom, there might be kids the same age, and they'd be reading different books at different levels, and their textbooks wouldn't all be the same. And people say, well, why is this child reading what says grade 4 on the outside, and this child is reading what says grade 2 on the outside, but they're the same age? Is this one child smarter than the other child? Absolutely not. It may have been circumstance. It may have been that that particular child had exposure to a certain subject.
Exposure. That's a super, super important word here, right? Like, where if you have not been exposed to anything, how could you understand it? Like, so for some children might have had an opportunity to be exposed to things that others haven't. And now you're kind of leveling, oh, this is where you're at. We're going to meet you where you're at, to kind of this personalized plan, right? That's amazing. Yeah. Carry on, Scott.
Racism is one of the few things, you touched on it, that doesn't seem to need exposure. That, often people find themselves, and I grew up in a small community in central Alberta, and I remember there being anti-Semitic jokes. And, people, not that it was a big deal, but, when I went to university here in Lethbridge, I was studying comparative religion history at the time, worked with a great professor, Marilyn Nevsky, who used to go to Nuremberg and give lectures on anti-Semitism and those things. And we got talking one day, and there were no Jewish people in our community. And I would dare say, in my case, I had never met at that point a Jewish person. I knew Jewish jokes, or jokes where they were anti-Semitic in nature, but I'd never been exposed to a Jew or Jewish culture or any of those things. And I would dare say that most people in our community never had either. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that, in the context of our talk, racism is one of those things that doesn't require exposure to something to make it occur. And often exposure is the cure, as in your story. Often the cure to racism or a lot of those negative things is exposure, which is kind of the point you and I decided about these talks that we're going to have over the summer, is to talk to each other and, to talk to the people that want to contact us about the things we've been exposed to, and how those things really, often in a different context, can really be things that give us hope, things that, inflame us with passion and creativity and compassion for other people, rather than turning into negative things or things that we direct negatively to other people. So
preach it, Brother Scott.
Well, and I think it's a worthy cause. And I think that, I really hope that together over the summer that we can encourage people to get that exposure and to find that hope and that positivity. And, I always associate creativity with positivity. And I think
Scott, can I share a secret with you?
Yes.
Okay. I kind of have this, I try and create a perception or an expectation when I'm going to have a conversation with somebody that it is going to be a life affirming experience in which we both leave with more peace and more joy and more hope and more love. I don't say that because people think you're crazy if you say that, but that's in my mind when we're having the conversation. That's what I'm hoping for, is we're going to have this connection, this life affirming experience, and it's going to make us better for the process and hopefully for the people that are part of this conversation, right?
Absolutely.
You, me, and whoever wants to be part of it, right?
Absolutely. And I have to say that in the context of you and I, you're one of the some people, I won't say it's few, but I wish it was a lot more. It really took all the restrictions that were associated with COVID and the things that we've gone through globally. And you really took those at a personal level and turned that into a positive situation. And you shared that with other people. And so, I know from sort of being in the orbit of your world, that this time of negativity and crushing weight of government control and all the things that people are really unhappy about, you've taken that personally and turned it into a really positive thing. You're like doing great personally, you're great health and you're happy, and you made all those people around you feel better because of it. And so I know for me, you've done more for me than the COVID vaccination shot in
Oh, thank you, Scott.
From
I got to tell you, this whole COVID time has been the most growth I've ever had. The most growth in just understanding myself, in happiness, in just getting a clear vision for what the rest of my days should look like and what kind of difference I should be able to make in the rest of my days. So I'm feeling really good about life right now, and I believe that now the change is made that I will be able to sustain that for quite a period of time.
It is amazing. It's really a transformation. It really is, Alan. I'm really proud of you as your friend, and I've learned from that too. And I really hope that sharing this time together and with other people in this format, that it can be something that other people take away. And
Scott, you're an inspiration to me, and I got a lot to learn from you. So tell us more. Tell us about, was it wabi sabi? No, wabi
sabi. Yeah.
Tell us wabi sabi. Tell us about that.
Yeah. And that was part of not only the culture we're in, but part of the education that we're talking about, in sort of a long drawn out way. We'll get back to that education part, because I think that's really important. And that's the other thing you and I are really passionate about, is kids and youth, and giving them the best opportunities to have the absolute best life. We know that they're going to have problems. We know they're going to have troubles, that they're going to have unexpected things happen to them. But, if everyone around them tries to give them the best tools they can to deal with that. And so we'll get back to that. But
do you think, Scott, that there's a lot of people in the community who are enough, have enough, feel they are enough, that they want to give back, that they want to be able to help somebody else? Do you think there's a lot of people in our community like that?
I think there are, and I think there's a lot of people that don't realize they are. And
I agree.
And I think that that's one of the benefits of the Hopeifiers, and one of the desired outcomes of that is that we can let people know that they're actually in that situation, and there's a lot of perception that goes into that, right? And it comes down to how you perceive your situation. And a lot of people say, oh no, it's a reality, either I do or I don't. You and I both know that that's really a subjective kind of position, because in other contexts, in other countries, and other cultures, when they look at a situation, they may see it completely differently than we do. And that sort of brought us to tonight's topic about wabi sabi. And wabi sabi is really interesting. And we were involved in education when I was in Japan, but I was very fortunate to work with the Aichi Prefectural Ceramics Museum. I made some really good friends there, and I ended up consulting for them and the Aichi government. The World Expo was there. So I really got involved in the cultural management side of Japanese government, and it was an amazing opportunity for me that I really thank those people for. From that, they had me, once that they believed that I had a fairly good understanding of it, they had me do a lot of talks and education for people from English-speaking countries on the ideas and concepts. And one of the ones that was most impactful, I think, and should be, and that is directly related to what we're talking tonight, is Wabi Sabi. And that gets thrown around a lot. You know, I've got a whole stack of books written by people. A lot of them, some of them, take the term and sort of turn it into what they want it to be. So first of all, I want to talk about what it was in the context that I was taught. And these are from, you know, Japanese curators and artists and people involved in culture.
Our viewers might not know that you were museum curator.
I was,
guy.
And I was in that world here before I went there. And then, you know, with the World Expo, and we took an exhibit to Turkey that I was part of. I was part of, I don't know, 20 or 30 really big exhibits there that were, you know, really exciting for me.
Right. That skill set, the pieces that go into that kind of thing are, you know, crucial skill set that you had to make that contribution. Right. So.
Yeah. And a lot of it is sensitivity, though. And I think that when you go to, and people approach it differently. And when I went to Japan, I didn't try to become Japanese. And, you know, a lot of people spend a lot more time learning the language and, you know, wearing geta shoes and dressing in yukata and things like that. I wasn't comfortable doing that. I was comfortable being myself and sharing in those experiences that they wanted to share with me. And, you know, I put a lot of my energy into joint experiences rather
more be respectful and participate in their culture, but not try and be part of it. Like you're more of a guest to their culture than one of them. Is that a fair statement?
I mean, the truth is not, you know, we talk a lot about cultural appropriation, and I'm always, I sort of, that kind of gets caught in my throat a little bit, because there's a really fine line between cultural appreciation and cultural misappropriation, right? And, you know, sometimes it's really obvious that that's what's going on, but other times, you know, I think that it gets in the way of people experiencing and getting that exposure to other cultures and ideas that you and I are talking about. And, you know, the people I worked with very, very happy to have me try and do things. And, you know, certainly as my role of consultant, I represented Japanese people and Japanese culture to other people. And so I was really honored to be in that role. I didn't want to inject my interpretation into that as much as possible. I wanted to experience it as genuinely as possible. And for me, that means, you know, not saying, oh, you know, I'm going to become this super expert in Japanese, whatever. For me, it was really about experiencing things with real people in their real lives. And that was a sort of my earlier comment about visiting somewhere as opposed to living there. You know, so I had to pay taxes in Japan. We had to deal, you know, we had our kids there. I ended up being in the hospital for a long time there. We dealt with a lot of the everyday stuff that Japanese people deal with as part of their lives. And that was great for us. So my understanding of Wabi Sabi comes from a ceramics background, and particularly ceramics to do with cha do, or the Japanese tea ceremony, which is sort of where the idea comes from. As you probably know, Chinese and Japanese use the same characters in kanji, but they have different meanings in them. So when we talk about wabi sabi, there's different words that are associated with them.
Wait a minute. They use the same characters, but there's different meaning assigned to those characters.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. And then there's subsets that only one or the other would use. But
all right. Okay.
Yeah. So the Japanese have kanji, they have katakana, hiragana, and romanji are all alphabets, the syllabaries. So wabi sabi, if you look it up online or crack a book on it, there's different words people associate with it depending on which meaning of that particular character they're using, right? So the way it was introduced to me and the way I'm sharing it with you really comes out of a Buddhist experience, particularly the Mahayana version or big wheel version of Buddhism. And so in that teaching, there's really three marks of existence. And they are impermanence, which I think we can all understand, suffering, and absence of self-nature or selfness. Okay. And so from a Western perspective, those could be considered negative words, right? The feeling we get from some of those words, like impermanence, suffering in particular, is a pretty negative word in English.
Right.
But the feeling associated with them in terms of wabi-sabi isn't negative. It becomes an aesthetic that is today, it's fused with a lot of other ideas, a lot of other aesthetics, and it's turned into something that's part of everyday life in Japan, and has spread beyond Japan. You can find concepts of wabi-sabi in lots of different cultures now, including Canadian, American, etc. So wabi really translates to aloneness or loneliness, particularly in nature, or it was described to me almost like a hermit's aesthetic or lifestyle. So, that idea that you're sort of alone and you're separate, but not necessarily in that negative, I've been left behind, I've been forgotten, I'm not accepted kind of way.
Okay, so it's like you're alone, but you're not lonely. Your presence with yourself is enough.
That's right.
Is that correct?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay, cool.
And that's what we're talking about, is perception.
Hey, Scott. Whoa, just pause. I'm sorry. I just thought of a burning question that I've had for a couple days, and I've been mulling it over, and I don't know the answer. So I'm going to wing it on you right now. Okay. You don't have to answer right now, but think about it. Okay, so if we're talking about in the present moment, future, past, and then the present moment is really all we ever have is this present moment, right? That's the reality of it. So if we are utilizing our imagination in this present moment, are we in this present moment? Or are we in the future? If it's so, like, you see what I'm saying? If you're imagining something, if you're imagining something that could happen in the future, well, then are you in the present or are you in the future?
Yeah, I have an answer to that, but that's a whole different show.
Okay.
Let's make a show out of that one.
Let's table that for later. Carry on back to where wabi-sabi. And then when you're saying about the first part, about the alone part, it's alone, but knowing that you're enough in being alone, you are not lonely.
Yeah, and there's sort of a hint of singularity in there. And I'm being vague on purpose because it's a lot of language is feeling, right? And so I think that one of the reasons that English has become so universal is often English can be used to describe something without feeling. Not that we don't have great poetry, not that we don't have great literature, but when you travel somewhere, we can share a word in English that just means a thing. There's no feeling attached to it, right? Okay. So, somebody told me, and I never went to the northern part of Japan, and I've heard it about the northern parts of Canada, where in the Aboriginal languages, there may be, like 30 words for snow. Right. And each of them have different connotations and different feelings and different emotions attached to them. When I grew up, snow just meant the white stuff and we did have other words like sleet to describe, wet snow.
Right.
There's really no feeling attached to the word, right?
No. Okay.
So anyway, these words are more feeling words, if that makes any sense. They should invoke some sense of that to you. So the next word,
suffering, alone, and what was the third one again?
Suffering, alone, and separate, like
separate.
single in its nature, not dependent on other things. Maybe that's a better way. Oh, malfunction.
Got it. Fixed it.
Okay,
I was talking too much with my hands and I disconnected a cord.
So, and then sabi. And again, like I said, there's different ways to interpret the character. So if you look this up and it doesn't use any of the words that I use, it may be perfectly correct. Okay.
Okay.
So sabi means kind of cold, lean, withered, um, affected by time,
Okay.
right?
Okay. Uh-huh.
So when these words come together, what you get is a feeling that something is simplistic, at least on the surface of it. It's kind of natural, rustic, and it includes an element of transition and decay, or time marked is maybe a good way to describe that.
Okay. Okay. All
Okay?
right. Okay.
So
Like weathered, like
yeah,
shown that it's done some work, like calloused on
yes,
your hands, that kind of thing.
yes, that
Okay.
kind of thing, exactly.
Okay.
And where that gets really, really cool, is when you start to look at what the where those two words come together, the intersection of those two words. So sabi, when you start to extend it, really is not necessarily what we think of as decay or rot or loss of something. It's the positive feeling that comes from being time marked, right? I always think of it, and this is where we're sort of going with hope, is that when I go out, I get something and it's brand new and it gets a scratch on it. Normally we get upset about that, right? We try and, oh, how can I take the scratch out? Can I buff that out? you know and often we don't stop and think, but what does that scratch mean to me? Like,
Okay. Okay.
you know and
I'm getting what I'm smelling
yeah,
what you're cooking. So I got scars, and I got scars that they might have hurt me, and I might experience pain, and it might have restricted me for a while, but it's not restricting me anymore. So
right.
it's something that it's kind of a badge of, yeah, this happened, but I'm still here, I'm still moving, I'm carrying on. Is
You
that
can't
kind of right?
Yeah, you can't see it, but somewhere down here, I have a scar on my neck that
Yeah.
when I was in coma, they put like a wellhead there, so they didn't have to keep putting needles in my arms. It just
Right.
had to spigot basically, right? So they could take blood or put stuff in or whatever they
How
want to do.
convenient.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was in there for almost 4 months. So, and that scar in the beginning was kind of big and nasty and ugly, but it also meant that I lived through that. The fact that I could
Yeah.
stand in here and look at a scar says that I'm here, I'm alive, I get to spend time with people I love and see new things and experience stuff. And the idea of wabi sabi is, especially sabi, is that idea of the transition of things are really about the journey we've taken and
Right.
about the things we've experienced. And I belonged to a knife collectors group, and this guy had like a $1,500 pocket knife, really tough, well-built pocket knife. Him and his wife, who's a nurse, came across an accident in the pass a few weeks ago. Van rolled. They were the first people there. People were trapped inside the vehicle. There was fire, smoke. So they ran up. Doors were jammed shut. So he whips out his pocket knife and he pries the door open. Luckily, the pocket knife is really well built, and the knife doesn't break. Gets a big scratch down it though, and who cares? Gets the people out. His wife is a nurse. She gets them, stops bleeding and those things. EMT comes and they're like, "Wow, they were really lucky you people were here." And after everyone's
Wow.
gone and the adrenaline's done pumping, he looks down and there's this big gouge out of the side of his knife.
Yeah.
Right. And his first impulse was sort of, oh, is there any way to fix that? Can I buff it out? Can I, what can I do here? And then with a few seconds of reflection, he realizes that he probably saved somebody's life.
Mm-hmm.
And, that damage to his property is a mark of his heroism.
And he's got a tool. He's got a tool that can stand up. He's got a tool that can do good work.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And so he can be proud of that.
Yeah.
And so, it's like age. When the wrinkles start to show and, we look at somebody and they look older than they actually are. And, what is that? Is that something to be hidden by cosmetic surgery and creams and all of that? Or is it a way to imagine what kind of life they've lived and the things they've seen and the things they've done and survived because they're there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Wabi Sabi, when, getting back to what we originally talked about, not in the context of Wabi Sabi, the things we're talking about are often negative. And I'll give you an example. So Ikebana is Japanese flower arranging, and there's different schools. And so there's some modern schools, and I'm generalizing. So please don't fill my inbox, people who do Ikebanas. I understand that they're all different, and I'm generalizing.
Hey, Scott, speaking of that, we could have a number up here so that people, if they want to participate, they just call right in when we're talking. Do you want that?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. The more, the better.
All right, great.
So,
I'll look it up for next episode. We'll air that number so that people will know that they can call in if they want.
Perfect.
Okay, carry on now.
So, and I love flowers and gardening. My mom was a big gardening person. And when you look at what I'll call an English flower arrangement, sort of the English garden tradition, it's very important that there's no dead foliage. It's very important that anything that's wilted is removed. And, it's a big, beautiful, full of life and vibrancy and color and saturation and perfection, really, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think back, a lot of that comes from our Greek tradition, where Plato believed that there was this place of perfect form, that we couldn't reproduce perfect on earth, but that there existed a perfect thing. So for everything that existed, there was a perfect. So there is somewhere a perfect hydrangea, and it's our goal to try and reproduce, that perfect hydrangea.
I don't know where this came from, but part of the quote read, perfectly imperfect human beings. And I thought, oh, I like that. Perfectly imperfect. It's okay.
That's Wabi Sabi right there.
Is it?
It is. Yeah.
Perfect.
We could have gotten rid of the last 15 minutes of me rambling and just said that, and that would have been it. Done.
No, that's good. Carry on, though.
So, yeah. So if you look at an English flower arrangement, you're not going to see dead foliage. You're not going to see any of that. And it's going to be full, and there's, really no negative space. It's, designed to really show that abundance and that vitality and virility and all of those things. And then when you look at very traditional Japanese Ikebana styles, what you'll notice immediately is compared to the English sort of garden style aesthetic, they're very sparse. And they're, often there'll be dead things in there, like bark, and, at times there will be wilted flowers that, I went to a great flower show on the English tradition, and they had tools for removing wilted petals off of roses and plumping them up and etc. And where in some Ikebana styles, they will look for a flower that is starting to die. And in that sense of that transition touches, and this is where the wabi part of it comes from, that individual base nature. I was watching some movie the other day, and the guy said, so they're sort of in a toxic masculine kind of way, we come into this world alone and we leave this world alone. And in that sense, that non-permanence connects to all of us, right? And as you said about time, we're always in a transitional state. And, the question is about how does that exist? One thing we know for sure is that as every second and millisecond goes by, you and I are in a state of transition, right? And so the aesthetic of Wabi Sabi celebrates that transitional state. And that feeling permeates so many different aesthetics in Japanese culture. It's one of the bases for chado, or the whole way of the tea, There's different schools of tea ceremonies, including Chinese tea ceremonies, the Kung Fu style, etc. But a lot of the vessels we worked with at the museum were really created, collected, and kept from a perspective of wabi-sabi. So it was very unusual to see a tea house. I never saw it the whole time I was there, actually, where the vessels were the same pattern, because that's unnatural. I mean, in nature, you don't have this perfect reproduction of really anything, right? And so the tea master, part of being a tea master is to choose things that go together, but also transmit that idea of perfectly imperfect that you talked about.
Nice.
Right?
Nice. Yeah.
And in the tea ceremony, what's called a cha wan is just cha tea, wan is bowl. They're designed, a lot of them, to transition over time. So the hot water that's poured in them, slightly porous lacquers are used, or places are left unlacquered so that the hot water and tea go in and they change the coloration of the tea bowl. There was a period of time where people would artificially put, not artificially, on purpose, they would put a nick or a notch out of the bottom of the foot of the tea bowl to stylize and sort of indicate that, as pottery over time, it chips, it cracks, and all of those things. And that was celebrated under one of the shoguns. And it really was sort of the idea of wabi-sabi when it becomes more institutionalized as part of the tea ceremony. And he had broken one of his favorite bowls, or someone had broken it, and he sent it to China for repair. At that time in history, the best ceramic masters were believed to be in China. So it was sent to China for that repair. And they repaired it in the traditional way of drilling two small holes. So if this is my bowl and it's cracked, they would drill a hole and another hole, and then a gold staple was pushed in between, over top of the crack, down into these two holes. And that was called the translating it roughly, large grasshopper method. And so, a crack would see a number of these staples, just like stitches on an incision. And when it was returned to him, he really felt it was ugly. He was unhappy with that. Although it was done perfectly, he was really unhappy with that. And so they did it again, except this time they mixed gold paste or gold powder into the lacquer or cement. And so the repairs were extremely visible, but beautiful in their own right. And he was very pleased with that. And that idea of taking a bowl, and a lot of chawan are passed down in families. They're something that really has a spiritual component to it, not just something to drink hot flavored water out of, but they take a lot of importance on that. And any cough drinker who has a favorite mug sort of has a hint of what that means at a certainly rudimentary level. So this idea, and it's called kintsugi, which kin is gold. It can mean metal, means a lot of things depending on which interpretation of the character. But in this case, kin means gold, and then sugi is like to fix. I can't give a very good translation of that. So basically, what it did is it produced this gold color repair that highlighted the broken repair rather than trying to hide it.
Nice. Yes.
I know that when we restore pictures in museums, we're often trying to restore the original. We're trying to bring the colors back out. We're trying to make it look more like it looked originally. We're trying to, turn back the hands of a clock and that time marked picture of it. So by doing that, we believe we're allowing people to share more in what the original artist intended, right?
Yes.
It's more original. It's the experience is more genuine because we've restored it to its closer to its original state. Where this idea of kintsugi was to highlight the fact that these things are used, that these things wear, that it's not something that sits in a cabinet. It's something that's actually used and is part of a life experience. And when you look at these marvelous bowls that have been repaired, you wonder who's drank from them, who loved them so much to send them to a master to have them repaired. Of course, now you can buy kintsugi. Tsugi is a very hard sound for me to make in Japanese. TSU. So sometimes I stumble through it still. Anyway, so you can actually buy a repair kit on Amazon nowadays. So it doesn't have to go to a master anymore. But originally it was a ceramics master that repaired it, and it would have cost a lot of money. So when we see these things, we have to wonder, who really owned this, who used it, who was it so important to that they wanted to keep it,
right? Yeah,
accentuate that use.
Hey Scott, we got 4 minutes and 20 seconds to wrap this up. So I just want to make sure I'm getting the main points of Wabi Sabi. You're telling me the iconic type thing is the cup that has been repaired with the gold. It's a very obvious gold fix.
Yeah.
And really, it's about celebrating the imperfect. Yes, there was, and if you think relate that to yourself, things that might have happened to you that might have perhaps could be perceived as that you are less than in some way. I got a scar on my forehead. I have a scar right here. I got a scar on my forehead. If I was self-conscious about that, I'd go around, oh yeah, I got that. So anyways, like maybe that's kind of that part of it, is that instead of being concerned about the experience we've had, is being appreciative of where we are right now and of the nicks and the creaks and the groans and the things that we have lived through and endured and continue on in spite of. Is that kind of about right?
It is right. And I think there's a few things to add to that. Is that light only comes through a crack, right?
Yes.
One of the guys who wrote on Wabi Sabi, an American, that's one of his famous quotes. And through accepting that we all are impermanent and that we all suffer, marks and dents and bruises, and really celebrating the life that's connected to those things, we can see hope in that. And that hope, that understanding of non-permanence, that understanding of change, really can drive us to a place where we're more hopeful, and so that we see those scars and the imperfection of our lives to be a kind of perfection, to be beautiful, and to be something to embrace, to something to highlight. And this comes right down to, I read a book about how a woman who is basically a life coach, and she uses Wabi Sabi, the concepts behind it, to teach people not to be really house proud, or what my grandmother would have called house pride, to let your friends in and see your house the way you live in it.
Yeah. I see. Yes. Not, it's not clean enough, I can't invite anybody in.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So, you can take Wabi Sabi from this very highbrow sort of aesthetic that you apply only to objects of art and that world, or you can apply it to everyday life. And I think that's how it ties into the Hopeifiers and what we're doing.
That is a beautiful thing, because you think about that, that becomes, why does that happen, right? There's some kind of story you're telling yourself that my house has to be X clean or somebody's not going to like me. Mm-hmm. Screw that. Invite them over. If they don't like you because your house is dirty, then don't have them come back again. Like, just, this is the way we are. Come on in, right? Isn't that how it should be?
My mother always said, never be ashamed of dirt. Be ashamed of filth. Like if you're too lazy to clean it up, that's one thing.
I see.
But if you've been out working in the field, never be ashamed of that. It's a mark that you're doing something, you're out there, you're working, you're being productive. And I know your time sensitive, so I want to close this off with a quote. Okay,
let's hear it.
And this is from Lewis Carroll. I don't know if I'm going to get it exactly right. Of course, he wrote Alice in Wonderland, and this quote comes from Alice in Wonderland. And the quote goes like this: "I knew who I was this morning, but I've changed a few times since then." Okay? And that's the non-permanence, and that's the hope. Is that most of us get up in the morning and we feel pretty good, and then we go to the bathroom and we look in the mirror and we're like, oh boy, I'm looking kind of tired and I'm looking a little old and I need some, and that sort of positivity we all generally wake up with for a few minutes can tank quite quickly, right? Because we start to look, oh, I got to do this, and I wonder if the car is going to start the morning, and boy, I better do these things. And like Lewis Carroll says in the story, and like Wabi Sabi teaches us as an aesthetic, is that things are non-permanent, and there's a hope in that. And when we wake up in the morning, we may decide who we are, and if we don't like those things, there's hope, because throughout the day, who we are is going to change, especially if we let it change. And I think that that's the message of hope: is don't be scared of change. Change is going to happen whether you're scared of it or not.
Beautifully said, Mr. Sweetman. Hey, brother, we will chat next week.
You bet. More hope.
All right.
Come back and see us. Thanks,
Yes.
Al.
Thanks.